So, I want to talk about an ancestor, and his name was Willie Alfonso. And I think that his last name is written both Winter and Winters. And I don't know if, you know, if his first wife might have been from maybe Louisiana. Well, a whole lot has been coming up about Alabama. I mean, for a few years. I don't know why. I don't even know if I've been to Alabama, um, but I don't know much about where her family came from. I think there's a generation or two of her. Uh, her parents. I think her parents are buried. Is it Oakdale? Oh, wait, Oakland. Oakland Cemetery. All right. There's. I think about Atlanta, and there's Oakland, and there's Westview, and we have ancestors buried at. I think it's. I might be wrong. Camp Creek might be out in northeast Georgia. Indian Creek, and that is maybe Clarkston. And I'm sorry if I'm not talking loud enough. I wish the speaker worked better, but um, I don't quite remember where he's buried. His death certificate says Scottdale. All right, so, but all right, so his first wife. Well, I've read something about one of her brothers, and in Find a Grave, I can spend hours on Find a Grave, but um, she had a brother who, I mean, conscripted. What is all the meaning of that word? But he was a Confederate soldier, whatever word. But then it looks in the story like he defected to Union, but when you read it, it's like he might have done that just to stay alive. I'm not sure, but, and it sounds like he said he was from somewhere other than Georgia, but yeah, there's a physical description of him that I find really interesting too. But um, bronze skin. All right, so that is her one of her brothers, and described as having bronze skin. All right, so I think about that's there are just many things that many of us don't know about where we come from, and because we're not allowed to because of the way history is whitewashed. So, but yeah, so his first wife, I just wonder about where the family came from before they were in Atlanta, and um, and I've kind of looked for the name in a place or two, but I don't feel like I haven't been able to piece things together yet. And why is that important to me? Well, I have talked before about like our mom saying, "Well, you're so interested in genealogy," and it's like you make me feel like I'm some old boring something librarian old lady with nothing better to do. No, that's really important to me. When people are cut off at the roots, a huge amount is lost, and people might not understand that. Well, I have my life and I'm going along and da da da, but it's so important to understand what came before. I think it's good to know where you come from. And there's plenty that I know, and I mean, there are things I might be able to tell brothers that they're not aware of, and things like that. But, but I don't know. I don't know how many care. It's important. It's important when you are moved from place to place, and and you go through this whole process of whatever goes on in school that is not completely positive. You know, and uh, And for me, I think, I look at some books over here that include a couple of travel books. I haven't traveled much, other than in sort of this area that I'm from. And I mean, I've been a few places on the continent, but I've only ever been off the continent in 1991 when I did sea semester in the Caribbean. So for me, well, that's a good jumping off point for more than the reason that I've been in the Caribbean and to maybe three countries, kind of, two and then one kind of, got my passport stamped at least. We didn't get off the sailboat in Venezuela, but St. Vincent uh, and Jamaica, briefly. We were mostly on the sailboat, but thinking about culture in this part of the country and thinking about the way there's discrimination at school and things like that against students who have culture that is oppressed and has been oppressed over generations. So, but there's a lot that people there are things that people are forced to, I could say, to not remember. I don't know if that's the best way for me to say it, but again, thinking about Willie Alfonso. So I first started feeling like, Garth, would you please stop? Come here. He's licking a lot and it's smaller. It just makes me anxious. So I don't know where her family came from before. They were in Atlanta, but she died at age 60, and he lived to 91 or so, and 91 and a half, I think, is what his death certificate says. And he got remarried to someone much younger, who might have even been younger than his, at least one of his daughters. Really young, and I have not been able to find anything about her on Find a Grave, and I don't know, but Willie Alfonso, what I see on Find a Grave, I have a photograph of him, 2 copies of the same photograph in a book that our grandparents gave us, a binder that I think that each of my brothers got too, and he's standing with a cane and a hat and a mustache, and he looks tall. I'm not sure. He looks tall and thin, but I'm not sure. Like, if I might have counted the bricks and tried to sort of estimate his height. I could do that again. But anyway, but he was a brick mason. That's on his death certificate, and what I found on Find a Grave is that it says he was born in Guilford County, but I can't find anything else than that. And, I don't see parents or anything like that. So he was born in the 1830s. And so there are questions a person could ask, was he, a question could be, was he born into slavery? And I'm sure that's part of the family's history. I mean, I think on both sides, but I don't, it's hard to find. I think it's pretty hard for people to find specifics, so I don't know, was he born into slavery? There's a question, was he born, why am I asking that question? Well, he was a brick mason. He lived to be 91 and a half. There's stability. If I think about that, if you think about, when I think about him, I feel comfort. I feel safe. I feel stability, and but I think about the routine of that, and that's what some people would say, that's a worker, and where all did workers come from in this part of the country? Well, many places, and weren't most slaves for a while? I mean, I know there are movies and there are books, but it's hard to put it together. It's hard to piece it together. But Willie Alfonso, what are my questions? I mean, where did he come from? Was he really born in Guilford County? If he was born in Guilford County, is he related to anyone buried in Guilford County, or do people move? Or other family members, winters or both, or do they have a completely different last name? Where do people come from? Where do people come from exactly? I mean, I feel like I got sidetracked. First, I talked about his first wife. Then I got distracted by Garth licking himself, and now it's like, well, who? It's not who is Willie Alfonso. He was the grandfather of one of my great grandmothers, and so I could talk about her for a minute, and that was Papa's mother, and Papa's mother's grandfathers were a, a, a brick mason, Willie Alfonso, um and a medical doctor who I know is a good person. I know that family had good values. um, but so that her grandfather who, and I'll talk about that for a minute. Her grandfather who was a doctor, his son who was her father was in a union. He was a, I don't understand it completely, but linotype, the way that newspapers were made before whatever, it's changed over the years and all that, but a linotype operator, a member of a union, and and um and yeah, and then he had a son who was also a union member, and I have talked about that because I'm like, that's a relief to me. That's a relief to me that people were members of a union. I mean, for the Atlanta Journal Constitution. All right, so they lived in Clarkston, and my great grandmother I think was probably born in Clarkston, and then Papa's father I think was born in Abbeville, South Carolina. Lost part of his leg as a child laborer on the railroad. His parents had moved from North Carolina to South Carolina. I'm guessing on the railroad, and it's very strangely an area where our non-psychologist brother has lived, south of Charlotte. So they were there, then they were in Abbeville, and then they came to Atlanta, and I'm not quite sure what year. I've tried to figure out what year, and then, and then, but how did they meet? How did she meet him? She was 15, he was 23 when they got married. How did they meet? Was he working in Clarkston? I mean, that's not like deep in the city of Atlanta, but her father worked for the Atlanta Journal Constitution. I don't know. There's just so many questions, and I want to say some things are real easy for me to feel and see that are under everything, but when there are these sort of parts of history where physically some things are no longer there or obscured, it's like, okay, I'm having a hard time seeing it. It's hard for me to see it clearly. But back to Willie Alfonso, um, I just feel safe when I think about him. I think, well, and then my mind goes off again to Papa's father, who had worked on the railroad as a child and then also was a brick mason later on. I don't know what all work he did, but there was a huge amount of stigma, and I don't know if that was even, I don't know what happened within his family when he lost his leg, and I've seen something that kind of suggests this possibility of him losing two siblings around the same time. So it's like, was there an accident on the railroad, and he at least lost part of his leg, but were there siblings who were killed? I don't know, and how do you get that information? And a person might say, well, there might or might not be railroad records. Well, I mean, knowing he lost part of his leg, I mean, do I need to try to dig for that stuff, or do I want to fool with that? The Atlanta History Center has, I think, a lot of, that sounds really strong and really good. And then there are some, I think it might be there, or in connection with that there are some railroad records that sound voluminous, but I don't think that they're online. So back to Willie Alfonso, well, how do I learn more? How do I learn more about where he came from? How do I learn more about who were his parents? Under what conditions was he born? Under what circumstances was he born? 1830, early 1830s. Um, and again, that's Papa's mother's maternal grandfather. Papa's mother's maternal grandfather, and a whole lot just starts going through my mind. Atlanta, it is Atlanta was not always segregated. From what I have read, there's this really good book about culinary Atlanta, and I think it might be, well, it's somewhere over there. I think it might be. I don't think it's in the back room, but I think it might be in that bookcase that I've turned around, possibly. But that's a really good book, and she writes about many things. But reading that book, she writes about Atlanta really not being segregated in the same ways, and but then it was that happened, and then that happened. So, and there were slave markets in Atlanta. I mean, I have read that there were 20, or so, and I think I found that when I was looking for information about slave markets in Asheville, North Carolina. And yes, there were slave markets there too. And there's a MARTA station in Atlanta that is where a slave market was. I've got a book that has photos of like then and then whatever was it now, maybe when the photograph was taken, and it was slave market, and then it's a MARTA station. So it's probably in the back room. And so anyhow, yeah, I mean, I've tried being isolated like this and not having communication from people, except I get a little bit of communication on YouTube. I mean, I get almost no emails. Our mom, and occasionally one of my friends in South Carolina, but it's like, is she upset with me? I mean, have I said something? I mean, I don't know, but that doesn't feel, it's just that sort of, what did I do kind of thing, and that's not a good feeling. Did I do something? And then it's like, all right, well, there's a lot going on, but Willie Alfonso, how do I find more about Willie Alfonso? And again, his last name was Winter. I'm going to say it was Winter and Winters, because I think that it was spelled both ways. And, where did his last name come from? And yeah, he was not, I think about his middle name, Alfonso, and it's like, all right, that was not an aristocratic family with, so where'd it come from? I don't know, just a few thoughts. I don't feel like I've said much at all. I think about what comes to mind is wet mortar, and actually I think about when I built the foundation for the studio that I built in Slater, and that is still, it looks like it's still there as a shed that's been enclosed. And yeah, the house sold for four times what I bought and sold it for in the past few years. But yeah, I think about mortar. I think about clay. I think about when I loved working with clay. I was actually at the sink washing a dish a while ago and imagining, could I work with clay again? And I just think, well, I mean, maybe I'm supposed to talk about history. Maybe I'm supposed to talk about the importance of having respect for our ancestors. I mean, some of us we do our best. We know that we need to have respect, helping people. Is it ever possible that when I talk about things, that helps a person I'm concerned about this too, and now I know a little bit more about this, and because I think sometimes this is one of the ways that we help affect change, is by learning from each other, and then we at least can communicate about it. Maybe sometimes we can do something, more than communicate. But yeah, so I guess, I didn't get to, I'm gonna say this real quick, and you know, I have been thinking recently. I might have fallen asleep thinking about this, but I think about a pot that I threw. It looked like a bottle that I put train tracks on. With sort of rolled out hand built, and when I was a ceramics student in Augusta, and I remember the ceramics professor just giving me this look. So I just squashed it or put it back in in the bucket where there's scrappy stuff from, there are scraps and things like that. But that was being silenced. That was her silencing me, and I will put it that way. I'm not going to put it in that passive way of that was me being silenced. That was her silencing me. And I can say I have experienced some years of suffering, and it is really important for people not silence like that or in any other way. But yeah, I made a bottle, was putting train tracks on it, and she just gave me a look. And and according to a classmate, she said I was entitled. And I mean, Miss, how about that? Or, yeah, entitled, does that mean I need to write a book? Entitled. That it's a real gradual and very hard process that I should not be having to do. I will not ever say I'm a good artist. I am a pretty good person. I care about people, and it's important to me to support creativity and to support expression. And yeah, she silenced me. And was that about Willie Alfonso? Well, he was a brick mason. What did he do before? Did he do anything before that? There was the Chattahoochee Brickyard. That wasn't far away. What are all the stories? What are all the stories? Yeah, when you have been silenced, do not ignore that. When someone has silenced you, I mean, can I call that out directly? I mean, I do in emails and things like that. And yeah, if I ever had to sit down and talk to her, I would have no problem doing that. And it might not sound real nice, but a person that feels threatened by students, by creativity, shouldn't be teaching, shouldn't be. And I don't know, what do? Put that person let that person have what that person wants, to do what that person wants, so that that person is, satisfied. I don't know. All I know is that, yeah, that was me being silenced. That was me trying to communicate creatively about what I could. And if I had not gotten that look, what would have come from that? Maybe I actually would have had a few pieces, and maybe I would have learned some more things about where I come from decades ago, instead of having to fucking struggle to stay alive. Well, Willie Alfonso, I kind of am guessing he was pretty calm. I kind of think someone that lives to be 91 and a half might not have a real bad temper. Someone that lives to be that old, someone that works like that, I'm thinking probably comes from generations of people who have worked. And you can have people who have come from generations of people who have worked, but that might be volatile and things like that. But I think about someone who comes from people who are used to it, That's some of what I think. Yeah, we're used to it. We're used to it. And when we are used to it, we need to pay attention. What are we used to that could endanger our lives? What are we used to that is harming people? What are we used to that needs to be, so anyhow, well, there's some words, and I hope I have said enough that's honoring Willie Alfonso. And yeah, it's real important to, I don't know, let the whitewash come off.